On today's World Insight, a look back at U.S. President Donald Trump's first 100 days in office, his actions and decisions of most consequence on the economy, international relations, the environment, and how the U.S. government itself functions. How have Trump's America First policies changed the U.S.'s global standing?
Welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. It's been 100 days already since the U.S. President Donald Trump took office on his second term. Latest polls done by various organizations has shown a majority of Americans do disapprove of he has handled the job so far. Soon after his inauguration, he rolled out tariff policies as he promised, which bear down on world trade amid turbulence. Relations between the U.S. and its European allies have been strained more. He has yet to deliver on his promise of ending the Russian-Ukraine war on the first day of his second term. And tall tariffs on Chinese imports are pushing the U.S. businesses to the edge. So how has the current U.S. administration's policies panned out so far? What comes of the post-World War II order that the U.S. itself sought to build? For deeper insights, let's loop in our panelists. For more discussion on this, in California, Spencer Critchley, political commentator and author of the book Patriots of Two Nations. In Shanghai, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, professor of East China Normal University, originally coming from the U.S. And in Beijing, Rong Ying, senior research fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. 100 days into the office. How would you comment so far? Trump 2.0 compared to Trump 1.0. Spencer.
President Trump hoped to do during his first administration and was unable to do because there were more responsible people around him. But as he himself says frequently, he solved that problem this time by having people around him who enthusiastically agree with whatever he wants to do. And as I say, I don't think it's hyperbole to describe the results as a catastrophe.
How much do we see this is more systemic and also results of choices for many out of various reasons? Joseph.
There is a broad awareness that something needs to be done. There needs to be some sort of radical change in order to sustain American power.
Right.
And he's trying to provide that.
Go to you, Ying, in Beijing. 100 days into the administration, of course, it is still early stage, but certainly a lot of apparent changes are already happening. How do you see Trump 2.0 compared to 1.0?
I think it's being expected, but it is, I think, the go beyond the anticipation and expect in terms of the questions that how far, why he was going so far, and what would be the next step? Is it going to be a course correction as his approval rate going down and economically running so many sort of difficulties and problems, and how these difficulties or challenges was translated into a kind of a policy changes or policy reversals that would help President Trump, either personally and or politically. So there are many questions and many, I think, unanswered questions the Chinese, both expert and also, I think, average Chinese are looking for.
And I guess the rest of the world as well. Having said that, though, there are real impacts of the policies and of the approaches being taken. Many analysts believe this at least represent uncertainties that's likely to continue for years to come. Whether there is, even if the Trump 2.0 comes to an end. So what does that mean for the rest of the world? Probably is more realistic for most of us to think about these days.
That a lot of countries, they're trying to struggle directly with the challenges that are being brought to their door by the United States. This includes especially American allies, countries that depend on the U.S. for trade, that depend on the U.S. for security, Seoul, Tokyo. We see this in Mexico and Europe and Canada. There's a moment where people are saying, okay, can we negotiate something? Do we need to stand our ground? Does Trump only respect strength? Do we need to make concessions? And at the same time, I think people are thinking more carefully about the future of strategic autonomy, how to better balance relations with other countries like China. We see, for example, I think one of the most remarkable things to come out of the start of the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, is China, South Korea, and Japan having trilateral discussions, talking about maybe a free trade policy, maybe even coordinating some of their responses to tariffs. And that would have been really completely unimaginable 4 years ago, and certainly given the policies that Biden was pursuing in trying to divide Korea and Japan away from China. So I think people are still trying to survive the moment, but they're also thinking about future strategic autonomy, but they're also thinking about how they need to balance relations with other countries.
Most of the people, Spencer, realistically speaking, are trying to put all the options on the table. They try to work on all the options so that they will have spaces to maneuver, whether it is a negotiation with the United States or it is a world in which U.S. is not likely to play a bigger role than it used to be anymore. So what do you see the nature of these uncertainties? What does that mean for everybody else, do you think, from where you are?
Well, it is so fundamentally self-defeating, I agree. And I'm not the only observer here in the United States to note that if Trump sees China as a major competitor, and of course many people do see China as a major competitor of the United States, then he could hardly give China a bigger gift than to undermine trust in the United States as a deal partner and an ally, thereby creating a great opportunity for a powerful competitor such as China to step into the gap he's created and say, well, you can trust us not to be so incredibly mercurial to suddenly jack up tariffs on you to 145%, or to just tear up and throw away trade agreements, or, I think even more damaging in some ways to suddenly just cut off foreign aid and betray all these suffering people who are now starting to die, and just creating an enormous blow to the reputation of the United States. And again, creating an opportunity for a competitor such as China to step in and offer aid and build goodwill that way. So even if you look at the world from the point of view of Trump, in which he thinks there can only be winners and losers, the idea of having a mutually beneficial relationship just apparently is something he can't imagine. Even if you look at it from his point of view, where he must win and everybody else must lose, he's virtually guaranteeing that he will lose and unfortunately do great damage to the country at the same time.
Joseph, we are seeing very interesting phenomenon these days as we speak. On the one hand, the Trump administration is trying to isolate China by putting tremendous amount of tariffs on China, by suggesting to the others, see, anyone who try to fight back will have tremendous amount of pressure as a result. But on the other hand, it is also trying to create an ambience, whether in the media or elsewhere through so-called leaks, that it is in contact with China on so many different levels in governments. And yet you heard very clearly at the press conference of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the two presidents are not talking on the phone. So how do you see this very interesting picture? On the one hand, the U.S. trying to show its muscle that whoever try to fight back against our tariffs will be punished, quote unquote, such as China. But on the other hand, to show it China's case as a bargaining chip toward all the other negotiations that are, as the administration claimed, going on, saying, you see, we are still in contact with China. And also to show to the market that you can rally, you guys, because things might not be that worse. So it's a lot of complex and entangled emotions in this, even when it comes to tactics dealing with China at this moment. Joseph, what is your observation? Quite a drama.
Well, I think the first thing we have to realize is that the drama of the global trade war attacking every country with tariffs has been an utter catastrophe, and he's had to retreat. And in fact, we've seen these retreats in China in terms of the numerous exemptions that he's put in place that have hollowed out a lot of the tariffs that he's imposed on China. So in fact, while a lot of tariffs have been imposed and remain on the books, there have been a lot of exemptions. And we see that polls in the U.S. believe that he has really made some poor decisions with tariffs, that it's having a harmful effect on the U.S. economy. And he has to continue to try to say, well, this is going to turn the corner. This is going to work out. But we've also seen not only sort of misrepresenting, the state of negotiations with Beijing, but also with Russia in terms of, the attempt to negotiate some sort of deal with regard to Ukraine. So I think he's been a little disingenuous or even misrepresentative of how matters are going. And I think an even more interesting case study is how he characterizes the negotiations with Japan. Japan saying we're going to toe the line. We're going to be very, very careful. We're not going to give in. And Trump again saying the same thing, that it's coming along. It's going to work out in the U.S. For the U.S. in the end. So that's part of his shtick. That's part of his narrative. But I think everyone understands that it's not necessarily true.
Spencer, your thoughts on this?
In international relations, there's often this hard distinction between what's called realism and idealism. And many people who think of themselves as realists will say, look, countries don't have morality, they only have interests. And all of this is just a competition of interests. And you're fooling yourself if you think morality plays any role in this. And then the idealists think that there is a role for morality. And I think you can't have one without the other. I think it's actually naive and self-defeating to try to be a pure realist, because what you do is create a world of maximum entropy. If you're constantly pursuing your self-interest and you can't be trusted to observe basic moral standards, like your word is worth something, or you will not be an aggressor, you are creating maximum entropy. You're making it so that nobody else in the world is actually your ally. They are only trying to exploit you while it serves their interests, and the moment it doesn't, they'll turn on you. So you're making your life in the world maximally difficult and forcing yourself to expend maximum energy trying to maintain some kind of homeostasis through military power and through the aggressive use of economic might and that sort of thing. Whereas where the United States has succeeded when it's gotten things right, I would say, is, for example, starting after the Second World War with the Marshall Plan, is realizing that instead of conquering people and subjugating them and threatening them and terrifying them, if you make them your friends and you try to help them out and build trade relationships where they feel they're benefiting very much as well, you end up becoming much stronger and having to spend much less effort and money defending yourself in an otherwise much more hostile world. And that, as I say, has been one of the most successful things the United States, when it's gotten that right, has done when it's gotten that right.
How much do you think the Trump administration, 100 days into the office, is spending the U.S. hard power? And how much do you think it is spending with the currency of U.S. soft power? And eventually, during this period of time, which many believe is likely to be a stretched period of time with the world is transforming, how will that example, if it is an example set by the United States, mean to the other players of the world?
I think the problem is to try to pick up a number of threads here. There was a crisis facing American democracy. It goes back, we can say, to the early 1980s when we began to see some radical changes coming out in the 1970s, and that culminates to some extent with Trump coming to power at the first time and being able to exploit that concern, and certainly concerns related to adequate health care, drug addiction, and then later, inflation and so forth and so on, and certainly the failures associated with governance and the pandemic. So I think there was a broad perception of crisis. I don't think that the crises that Trump has created narratives around were the actual crises that facing the U.S. And in some sense, this is the politics of distraction. I don't think China poses a crisis to the U.S., but there's a desire to sort of externalize and create that enemy so that maybe we can refocus in a different way. I do think that the tariff policy was a catastrophe. I'm sympathetic to the analyses that say that it was a broad attempt to try to manipulate the bond market and the Federal Reserve. So far, that has failed. Both of those have failed to move in the direction that he has wanted, and instead, he's had to retreat on the tariffs in order to prop up what remains of the U.S. economy at this time and U.S. economic power.
If I, being a partly cloudy optimist, which I would love to be, so how much space is there and how much imagination does that mean with the absence of U.S. as a good example for the rest of the world, that the rest of the world can come up with other inspirations and options and be able to discover something that has already been there but may not have the opportunity earlier to be picked up?
I personally don't want to envision such a kind of scenario where United States would be either for its own reasons, kind of self-destruction, or for political, for whatever, that it would be live by itself. After all, I think we are living in a globalized world. Whatever I think happens in a particular country, let alone a big country, a major country like the United States, are going to affect us. So good or bad. I hope I would be, I think, more optimistic in a way that the United States, the system, the political sort of institutions were able to help the polity in the United States to correct the deviation or distraction that has been created as a result either for political or history. Well, I think we had a very fascinating historical conversations. But all in all, China is looking for, or China is advocating for, is a kind of a system or governance, global governance system where every and each country will have to live with and accept certain constraints in terms of rules and norms. And in this way, I think China, on the one hand, they say it said it would like to, it has strongly entitled to defend its right of development. On the other hand, what China is doing is for the sake of this system, for the sake of a working system, if I can say. So all in all, we would like to hope that we'll bring the United States along to make, the Chinese always say, to a better and more peaceful and sustainable world.
Spencer, your perspective?
Yes, I think that there is so much opportunity for everyone involved to just pursue relationships based on mutual benefit, and it can sound naive, but again, I think this is where it actually becomes a form of realism. All of the energy that has to be expended on spying on each other, doing espionage activities, building these enormous military capabilities, getting into trade wars, all of this stuff is entropic. It ends up being a net loss for everybody involved. And the extent to which we cooperate with each other, and of course that will mean competing and sometimes having some pretty heated conflicts, but the extent to which we can do that within a system of rules that people can trust, some basic standards of mutual respect and red lines we agree not to go beyond, it turns out everybody does much better. And that's some of what I mean by what's happened in the recent decades not being as rational as it is psychological, because the world at about the time of the early 1990s, when Francis Fukuyama famously suggested we might have reached the end of history, meaning we had reached the optimal solution pretty much, was a time of growing international cooperation and great optimism that a lot of the Cold War was over, and that a lot of these traditional rivalries and contest of empires and stuff was now consigned to history, and we would move forward peacefully, again with competition and even conflict, but essentially peacefully and for mutual benefit. But around the same time, there was an enormous movement around the world, which I think is largely non-rational, which amounts to a rejection of that modern world.
Joseph, how much do you think there is space for people to think out of the box? One could describe that box as a frame that the earlier rhetorics of the United States created.
One of the things that we have seen in over what in China we call the new era is a very careful construction of what the Chinese government calls a principles-based foreign policy, that China is committed to both realism and idealism. China is committed to confronting global existential concerns like climate change, working with developing countries and emerging markets, while also trying to advance structural reforms to its own economy, putting in a privileged position green innovation and green development. And all of these are directly answering what are some of the main concerns in China, but also in the rest of the world. I would go back again and say that it isn't just Trump that has hollowed out the narrative of the U.S. in the last 100 days. It was also, we saw this also happening with Biden, in so much as when Biden held his democracy conference, most people said, well, the U.S. isn't that democratic, certainly in its international relations. A lot of people were disillusioned with his proxy war in Ukraine. A lot of people were disillusioned with his support of what many assess to be the genocide in Gaza. And this is certainly something that cost him a lot of votes and brought Trump back to power. And above all, I would say Biden consolidating America's position as the world leading petroleum producer, while tacitly or sort of pretending to be a champion of green development. So, we have to answer your question very directly, I think China has positioned itself over the course of more than a decade as offering not out of the box thinking, but a new path, one that is very attractive to countries that are particularly at risk, much more at risk to climate change than the U.S. or Russia is, in so much as they belong to the global South. So I think it's in those contexts that we see innovation in relations and movement forward through projects like BRI and others.
How much luxury can this administration have, given the political timetable, given the current public support, and given the future strength of U.S. economy, if it's still to be maintained, to pursue some of the biggest issues it is after? For example, tariff war, for example, immigration issues, for example, the fight against so-called the deep state, or the role of Dodge, and the list goes on. How much luxury of time does it still have?
I'm very much worried that we may not have such a luxury of time as we had anticipated. Look at what happened in the week of the so-called Liberation Day. Nobody would expect that the economic impact that on the United States in particular, but the world at large, that a decision like that would cost, we're talking about trillions of US dollars, and untold sort of uncertain impact for the United States and for the world at large.
I see.
And we can certainly, people would say that, as I would hope that the resilience of U.S. political system, democracy, will help, as it had done historically, correct the course. But we are in a different world, and we have so many uncertainties, so many challenges. So we don't have time. Time is not enough.
And there are the midterms coming up in less than 2 years, and we can't project forward on current polls, but the polls now do not look good for the Republicans, and I think they're justifiably nervous. So I would say he's already out of time, but of course we can't ultimately predict what's going to happen. At the same time, unfortunately, people have notoriously short memories.
How much luxury of time?
I think he has 100 days or less to score some victories, or at least things that he can portray as victories. This would include potentially consolidating government cuts and reforms, especially matters impacting government spending that affect the deficit. I think he has to try to achieve some sort of tax relief with Congress. I don't think that's necessarily a good policy for the U.S., but it would be something that a lot of people would like to see.
Yeah.
I agree that what he's doing on the border is abominable, but there are a lot of people who are still supporting those policies. Not the worst aspects, but that's where he's probably most popular right now. Maybe around 51% for some of those policies, at least. I think internationally, he needs to have some sort of victory. Maybe that's a breakthrough with Iran, although that would be not that big, I think. But I think he'll need to maybe try to approach some sort of new relationship with Canada once that election is settled and a new government is placed. Maybe we'll see some sort of movement between China and the United States. But the thing that I'm most concerned about right now is the extent to which I think we see a number of international forces trying to spoil the burgeoning positive relationship between India and China. There's some friction right now between Pakistan and India. But that was something that I think we were hoping to see, but we've seen the U.S. now pressing New Delhi with trade things. So anyway.
All right. There are a lot of things that we can have on mind as we observe and analyze. But so far, thank you so much for the three of you for sharing your different insights and compare your ideas. That has always been very much treasured, a real discussion. Appreciate it. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of my team, thanks for being with us. Bye for now.